Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our August free web class. My name is Benji. I'm joined by Mark. Thank you all for being here. Today's session is called Time Freedom for Founders. And we're going to talk about what I think is arguably the most important topic when it comes to entrepreneurship and scaling a business, which is how you manage your time and your priorities. This is something that's talked about a lot and I think taught very poorly, not just in our school systems, but even in the modern, business content environment. We always, we always mention how important our time is. We know that it's the one resource we can't buy more of. And yet I find that it's very rarely discussed or taught in a way that's very implementable, that's very actionable. And so today, Mark is going to walk us through a few great ideas. One will be this flow productivity model, which is an incredible framework to help you just organize your calendar and make sure it's aligned with your goals. We'll talk about the eliminate, automate, delegate process. We're going to go through how to do a time audit and understand where you're spending your time and what aspects of that is productive versus wasteful. And we're going to go through how to align your schedule with the 5 pillars of an integrated life. So when we do these sessions, I always ask for questions to go to the Q&A box and regular comments just to stay in the chat box. So if you do have a question for Mark, put it in the Q&A. I will try to interrupt him if there's a natural moment. If I have to wait till the end, we'll wait till the end. But that's the plan for the next hour or so. Mark, are you ready on your end?
Yeah, all set. Off the start, what I want to kind of talk about is this time freedom concept. I think a lot of times people really focus on trying to create this life where we've got business, we've got our personal, we've got our romantic relationship. If you've got kids, you've got your kids, and then you've got your parents, and there's just I think too many compartments to life to possibly ever really feel like you're enough. And I think one thing that I've struggled with throughout my career, almost regardless of how successful the business was going, is this feeling of just never really feeling like I am enough. I'm maybe not enough for the business. I'm not enough for my family. I'm not enough for my parents. It's just hard to spend enough time with everybody. And it's kind of hard to live up to what we believe are the expectations of others. Now, I honestly believe that most of the time, these are stories that we've created. I think we tell ourselves stories that make it feel impossible to live up to everybody else's expectations, but often they're just perceived expectations. And I kind of want to talk about this in the context of time management because as I really tried to recover from burnout, and I had burnout at the degree that I think most could only imagine, it was paralyzing. It was so bad. What I really kind of came to realize is most of my burnout was as a result of not really understanding just how much time I was giving to things that I probably shouldn't have even been doing. I either shouldn't have been supporting certain things or I shouldn't have been focused on certain things. But what I really found is I kind of went through life focusing and spending time on things that just were frustrating me in the moment. And the problem with us high performers, and I expect anybody that logged in today is a high performer. Nobody sits around on their lunch break talking about time management unless they're trying to get more done. And the problem with us high performers is we get really comfortable being busy. And when something frustrates us, we tend to chase after it and try to do something about it. Sometimes there's just so many things, though, that are frustrating that we start parking a lot of things or compartmentalizing a lot of things into some very specific buckets. And typically, I think the things that we kind of park are the things that maybe we fear the most or we perceive as being the hardest things to overcome. If you're like me and many others, when you start to feel burned out and you don't have enough time, it's really hard to get out of this busy trap because there's just always something else to do. There's always somebody calling, there's always an email, there's always a customer that has a problem, there's always a big opportunity landing on your plate. And with so many things happening in the busy trap, you never really step back and work on yourself, work on the business, or really even consider whether or not you've created the time and space for yourself, first and foremost. And then, secondly, of course, for the business. But there's a lot of things that happen in between there. And I wanted to talk about that today more than anything, because oftentimes what we perceive as being business problems are actually more personal time management problems. At least I found that personally. And so there's a bit of a cycle here, right? We get into this busy trap, and that kind of flows into us feeling like we don't have any time. We end up in this really reactive mindset or mode where day to day we're just always trying to catch up. And that feeling is exhausting. Just kind of always pushing yourself to get a little bit closer to this day that never comes. And I really think that ends up creating a misaligned life. It certainly did for me. Now, what ends up happening here is I think we feel as though we're not really capable of keeping up with everything that we're doing. So sometimes we just kind of press the pause button and go backwards. Sometimes we just kind of hover. And most of the time, as I said, we're just kind of chasing something that's probably never going to come. Now, most founders and leaders in businesses tend to do the same thing. When they get real busy, they decide that everything is so chaotic that they have to go hire somebody to help. Now, I've made this mistake more times than I can count. And what happens is when everything is super chaotic and you go and hire people to solve that chaos, oftentimes more chaos follows. And this is when I think the burnout gets to its worst, is when you've taken more and more busyness, more and more chaos, and you've skipped a few steps in systemizing it, and you start hiring people, you're more or less now passing your chaos off to somebody else who doesn't have any systems, doesn't have the context or the experience that you might have in managing that chaos, and things actually get worse. And it feels much, much harder to fix when you kind of catch yourself in this rut. And, I think this is natural. I don't think we should beat the hell out of ourselves over this. It's just the way it is. And you kind of almost earn the right to learn what we're talking about right now by being a high performer and kind of reaching your personal limit. And so I don't think this is something that we should be ashamed of. In fact, I think it's something we should all celebrate. If you've kind of gotten to the end of the more chaos stage, then you get the opportunity to rethink the way that you do this. And you kind of go from, busy to chaos to installing systems in the business. And I just noted install the LeanScaper systems, but really what we're talking about here is installing a system where you can take your vision from your head and you can really explain that vision and the supporting mission to everybody in the company. But most importantly, create some smart goals and really start to build standard operating procedures that enable you to then hire and develop staff and then monitor and then just focus on results and continuous improvement from that point forward. And that is the recipe that works. And yeah, I've spent lots of time and money on coaches. I've worked with some incredible success stories who have taught me a thing or two about trying to do more in the same amount of time. And just about every mentor that I hired or coach that I hired or course that I took kind of pointed to this same cycle where you have to take the time to systemize your problems, and then you can go ahead and delegate, and you can start to set really good benchmarks or expectations, targets. You can build scorecards. You can start to see how things are going, and then you can more or less work as the mentor or the coach to your team to help get the incremental improvement out of the systems so that things just keep getting better and better. And of course, as you scale the business, they break and you got to iterate and improve the systems. But generally speaking, this is really the recipe. We'll hop to the next page here, and I'll just kind of talk through a few things that really help me on an ongoing basis. If you ever listen to me speak, I say the word flow a lot, and flow means a lot of things to a lot of people. And we kind of use flow as we do in English for many different purposes. But for me, when I'm talking about flow in terms of my schedule, my life, what I'm really talking about is this ability to really focus on everything that's important and then really kind of operate in flow where I have lots of energy. There's not a lot of restrictions. There's not a lot of things getting in my way. I've kind of eliminated all the waste and I can kind of flow along without a lot of interruption. And so I sometimes, people who are close to me hear me talk about being in the river. And this concept of flow is like if I hop into a river and there's not a lot of obstacles and I know exactly where I'm headed and the river's going in that direction and I'm super clear on how I'm going to get there, then it just feels right. And this concept of eliminating all the obstacles is flow for me. And I think in business and in my personal life, I've really kind of come to this realization that I don't really have two separate lives. I really just have an integrated life or one life. And I want that entire life to feel flowy. I want it to feel natural. I don't want it to feel chaotic and filled with all kinds of flow interruptions and all kinds of resistance. I just want it to feel naturally enjoyable. And so I really like to focus on one life and just designing an integrated life where my work and my love life and my family life and my friendships are more or less all just interwoven. And I don't really have to feel like I'm working or I'm not working. I just more or less get up and enjoy every day. Now, of course, everybody needs some vacations and everybody needs to get away once in a while, but ultimately, I don't really want to have a life where I feel like I have to escape my life or compartmentalize my life and only enjoy certain components. And particularly when it comes to work, I just really want my work to feel purposeful enough that I see the impact, I enjoy what I do, and I want to show up each day because I want to spend time with the people and I want all of the love and connection in my life to just kind of come from all aspects of life, not just one area. So, with this flow concept in mind, really breaking it down, like the focus component is really important. Now, the really important part here is as a CEO, as a founder, as a business leader, maybe you're an operations manager, or maybe you're a design department management or a crew manager, could be just about any leadership role. And you've heard me say before, I think everybody in the world is a leader. Maybe you're leading your family. Maybe you're leading people in a sports group or a church group. It could be just about anywhere. But I think us leaders, and that includes everybody here, have to focus on tasks that really apply to where you're at in life. And as founders, if you're a business or a founder of a business, you're probably noticing that you're not always focusing on tasks that are kind of worthy of your time. And this is easy to understand. I think we all find ourselves doing kind of $10 tasks when we should probably be focused on $10,000 tasks. And what I mean by this is I can go spend an hour and generate 20 or 30 or 40 or $50 worth of value just about any way I pick. I mean, I could mop the floors in my house and make $20 an hour or save $20 an hour very quickly. Or I could really focus on solving a problem in my business or for somebody else that is going to save hundreds of hours or thousands of hours. And the way that I would do that is by creating a system and then spending time teaching others that system. And I call those $10,000 tasks. And I've done the math on my last 5 years of work. And over the past 5 years, by just focusing on these high value tasks, I generated $28,000 per hour in actual net profit every minute that I was, every hour that I was working over 5 years. When I totaled up how much money I earned and divided it by the likely hours worked, it was $28,000 an hour because I don't waste my time doing $10 tasks ever. And every time I show up to a meeting, I'm there to talk about strategy. I'm there to talk about systemization. I'm there to talk about what good looks like. I'm there to talk about metrics. I'm just not there to do the work. And I'm quite proud to say that I don't actually do much. I don't build a whole lot other than maybe content for presentations like this or building out some high level strategy. I just don't really produce much. And I think the leader in a company or the leaders in a company have to learn to just get a little bit lazier when it comes to actually doing the task work in order to make time and to create mental space to be a better visionary. And being a better visionary is not just saying, hey, this is where we're going. It's also saying, here are the strategies that are going to enable us to get there. And I think a lot of times visionaries have this excuse and they say, well, I'm a visionary and I need an integrator or I need a systems thinker to make it all happen. And I'm kind of here to say that I don't really believe that. I think visionaries should not just decide what the future holds, but they should also dig in and help create a roadmap of how to get there. And those are execution strategies, which is very different than just simply hanging around and saying, I've got this strategic vision for the future that's going to change everything. I think that in itself doesn't go very far. In fact, I would hazard to say that you're nothing more than a dreamer if you don't get involved in the execution strategies. And so my $10,000 tasks are really me taking the time to co-create systems with my key people. Co-creating systems not only enables them to do the work in your absence, but it helps them buy into the systems and take part in creating the best practices to follow. And that way, when the system's not working, they take the ownership to adapt and modify systems and make them better on an ongoing basis. Because our first iteration on a standard operating procedure is nothing more than a starting point. It's never the finished product. And so first I have to get really focused on where I spend my time and what type of tasks I do. And then again, I have to limit where I spend my time. Now, time blocks I think are really important. One that I highly overlooked probably for the first 25 years of my career. And by not ever really having time blocks, what I ended up doing was just working all the time. 6 in the morning till 10 at night, 6, 7 days a week was pretty normal for me. And the irony is I think 2/3 of the time I was doing the busy work. I was doing things that weren't really going to ever move the needle, probably were many, many $10 tasks. And quite honestly, I was probably just getting in the way of the leaders that I had hired in order to prevent the chaos. But the truth was, by being stuck right in the front of it, you're really just causing more delay in actually improving the company or your life than, just kind of parking yourself once in a while. And that's why I say it might be wise just to get a little bit lazier. So these time blocks really do create freedom. And we're going to talk about how to do that in a few minutes. But sometimes people look at my calendar because I calendar a year out and I show people anytime they want to see it. And they look at it and they say, wow, like that looks a little bit rigid. Like you've got time blocks from 5 in the morning until 10 at night. Like, to be honest, that looks a little boring. And I don't think I want to live my life that way. And it's always an interesting conversation. I've had this conversation with friends, with coworkers, with lots of people. And sometimes what ends up happening is as we start talking and we go through my time blocks and we go through 4 weeks together, and that usually only takes 10 minutes, I kind of explain what I'm doing in all of these time blocks and why. And then usually I'll just show my personal goals, which my personal goals are very simple. They've been the same for a number of years. Ultimately, I'll talk about them in a second here, but ultimately, I just keep changing the activities to serve those goals. And my time blocking is really just designed so that I spend time optimizing these various components of my life. So when I kind of show someone my calendar, although it seems rigid, once they look at my goals and how I spend my time, they say, I get it. Like, this is actually not rigid. This is you designing the life of your dreams in a calendar and then getting up each day and getting the enjoyment of actually just living that life that you've designed. And I've had countless people come back and explain it back to me without me explaining it blatantly to them, because it really is that simple. And ultimately, once you've really designed your life and it's fully integrated, where you take care of yourself and your love life and your family and your friends and your business, and you have time for continuous improvement in all aspects of life, then life starts to feel like it's supposed to. And this feeling of not being enough starts to dissipate because you designed your life and you get to live it. And, I'm a big believer that everything that happened in the past, it's no longer. And everything that might happen 5 years from now may never be. We might not get that opportunity. But what is real is just what's right in front of me. And if I design the life that I want to live every moment, every day, knowing that I am moving toward this vision that I have for my life, if I'm lucky enough to live long enough to see it, then I'm probably doing the right thing each day. And if I enjoy the people I do it with and I enjoy the process, and most importantly, and I'll say this again, most importantly, every day I get to celebrate the wins, which are nothing more than the incremental improvement in each part of my life, then where I spend my time feels right. And I get to feel like I'm enough. And so this allows me to operate in flow. When you feel like you're enough and when you've eliminated all of the distractions, you actually start to really feel motivated to do that deep work, to do that stuff that used to scare you or used to seem overwhelming or used to seem too big. And nowadays with AI, it is so easy to tackle big projects. I do my deep work while using AI daily, and I get weeks or not months worth of work done in a couple of hours because I'm super clear on exactly what problem I'm trying to solve or what area of my life I'm trying to improve. And I try to do this work in a higher energy zone. And what I mean by that is I choose times of the day where I know that I have a lot of energy and a lot of focus and a lot of capacity to do this deep work. And by doing so, I really end up getting a lot more work done. And what I do is I kind of then use that time to do other things in life, whether that's improving my mental health, my physical health, spending more time in my romantic relationship, or more time with my kids and my family, or more time with friends and community. But ultimately, when I really focus on wasting less time, eliminating all kinds of meetings, batching all of my tasks, and getting my work done in these deep work blocks, I invent time. And I think this is the difference between rich people and poor people, and overwhelmed people and fulfilled people. The difference is really quite simple. Rich people invent time. And I'm not here to talk about getting rich or poor. None of that means anything to me. But rich people have more freedom. Let's face it. They have more freedom to do the things they'd like to do, and they have more time. And generally, when we think we want to get rich, and if you're like me, I grew up with not too much. I grew up thinking I wanted to get rich. But I didn't want to get rich. What I actually wanted was more time. I just wanted more time than my parents had because I watched how hard they worked. And I watched them leave early in the morning and come home late at night. And I realized very quickly the only thing my parents ever argued about was money. And so money became an area of focus for me. My relationship with money became Well, if I work harder and I work more, I'll have more money. And that is true, but I won't actually have more fulfillment. And so I think what, kind of bridge you get to as you've had some success is, have I really just now traded all of my opportunity for fulfillment for more money? And I think that's a really depressing thing to actually start to feel. Now, many people who have found success have come up to this realization and found themselves really depressed or burned out. And generally, the answer is really right behind where you spend your time. If you feel like you're not enough, it's probably because you're not putting enough time into the things that you'd really wish you could. Areas of your life that you'd like to either, share with other people, or areas of your life that you'd like to spend more time improving. That could be your career. It could be your fitness, could be your mental health, could be a hobby, could be just, spending more time with other humans. But ultimately, I think where we really feel like where we have the most resistance in life is usually telling us something. And so I think it's important to ask yourself, where do you leak the most time right now in your life? And when I say leak time, it's like, where does it just disappear? Where are you spending all kinds of time without much return as it in love and connection or fulfillment? And this is important because sometimes we start to realize that our life doesn't feel all that fulfilling, and we don't have the love and connection in our lives that we want because we just don't spend time doing the things that actually add to our lives. It's a difficult thing to kind of really look at sometimes, but a time audit makes it a little bit easier. So, my first challenge in red here is, take a time audit for a week. Each day, carry around a little notebook, and 2 or 3 times a day or more, just write down where you're spending your time. And I'll say start in 15-minute blocks. I've kind of gotten mine down to 5-minute increments and looking at 5-minute increments. I don't plan my day in 5-minute increments. I'm certainly not at that level. I'm more of a 15 to 30-minute person. But start to really audit your time in these small incremental pieces. An hour to start might be fine, a half hour, 15 minutes. But when you actually audit your time, you begin to realize that you're not out of time, that you just spend your time doing a lot of things that really don't feel fulfilling, things that feel almost as though you're wasting your time. And I'll be honest, once you start to notice what the list looks like, you become a lot more thoughtful around changing the list. When you do change the list, and when you start to stop doing things that don't actually fill your cup, that don't actually make your life better or the people that you love, their lives better, then what tends to happen, I think, is you almost immediately start feeling like you are enough. Because I think the feeling of not being enough largely comes from wasting our time. And I think that's our inner self, our subconscious mind actually letting us know, hey, you do have more time, but you're not actually spending it doing the things that really matter. I think our inner selves know a lot more than we think, and I'll call that our soul for the purposes of this call. We'll jump to the next page. So that inner voice inside of us that's usually been there most of our lives. I'll say it's our soul. Whatever you want to call it, that's up to you. When you're young and when you think back to your earliest days, you can probably remember this version of self, who you are, knowing who you are. And that probably hasn't changed too much over the years. When you get in touch with your inner self, you know who it is and you've been there forever. And I think we all know what I mean here. And so we'll call that our soul. Your soul needs to be really involved in this exercise. So you got to go inward and you got to be willing to be honest with yourself when you do a time audit. Because a lot of people do a time audit and they keep telling themselves the same old stories, which is, I'm busy, I'm busy, I'm busy, I have no more time left in my day. And you justify busyness instead of actually looking at what matters and where you should be spending the time and what you really want. And again, we're just kind of telling ourselves these stories so often that they just become the way it is. And it's only us that can change it. And if you want to create more time and if you want more fulfillment, you have to be honest with yourself about what you're doing with your time right now and whether or not that aligns with what you really want. And then again, you got to really look at that list and say, is this a $10 task or a $10,000 task? Because your net worth and your ultimate success financially and in your career depends on whether or not you do $10 tasks or $10,000 tasks. Whether you work for yourself or someone else, it really does boil down to that. Money is nothing more than a construct. Us humans created it to change the way that we traded our time with one another. And generally speaking, you make more money when you solve a more complex problem for more people. In other words, if I solve a basic problem for one person, I'm not going to get paid much. If I solve a complex problem for a lot of other people, and if I get other people to solve that problem in my absence, well, then my earning potential is exponential. And so think about that and really layer that in to your time audit, because many times we're really wasting our time doing things that don't solve big problems for a lot of people. And this is why I say it's so important to utilize AI and utilize LeanScaper AI and Lana to create your standard operating procedures. This is where your return on your time invested is in the tens of thousands of dollars per hour. Because when you create a system and then you share it with others and you train other people, you enable them to solve complex problems at scale for many people. And therefore, you and your business end up earning much, much higher revenue per hour, per day, per year, and life gets better. There is definitely no doubt that with more money, you can have more impact. And if you squirrel all that money away and keep it all to yourself, and you think you're going to just go retire and lay on a beach and be happy, I'm here to say that's bullshit. I don't believe in that. What you do with all this extra money, this extra fuel, as I call it, is you continue to build a better business. You continue to impact your community. You continue to support your family in new ways. You buy time and you create more time for yourself and your family. You make lives better for your employees. You make lives better for your customers. You can impact the world around you. And I think when you do that and you use money as fuel, life continues to get better and better and better. And it's not about putting the money in the bank like a squirrel. You can use this money to do many great things in the world. But it all happens when you figure out how to manage time, the most complicated thing ever. Now, if you think about this EAD ladder, which is really just eliminate, automate, and delegate. And the reason I like to think of it as a ladder is there is an order. First, we have to decide, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And once we're clear on what we're trying to achieve, then we decide how we're actually going to spend our time. Now, when you're designing an integrated life, this isn't just work. And that's why I'm not just talking about your business today. I'm talking about your life, because you only have one. And I don't believe that work is one part and your personal life is another. I think everything's personal. And at the end of the day, you can't really start to think about delegating unless you really understand what it is that you want people to do for you and why. And so when we think about where we're headed with our vision and our mission and our goals, that starts to dictate what we should even focus on systemizing before we even start to decide what to eliminate and automate and delegate. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I want you to kind of think of your life going from chaos, not having enough time for yourself, for your family, for your coworkers, for your customers, to, moving up that ladder to this life of focus where it's really easy each day to get up and know that where you're spending your time is the right place, and knowing exactly what progress looks like, knowing how much progress you've made, and knowing what you're going to do next. That lifestyle of having that kind of focus, I would define that as having a fulfilling life. A life where you understand that where you spend your time is really where you want to spend your time. And who you spend your time with is really who you want to be with. And what you spend your time doing is what you want to spend your time doing in order to have the impact that you aim to have. And that's really what time management's all about. And so it starts by doing the time audit and looking and saying, well, hey, what could I eliminate? What could I automate? And what could I delegate? Now, once you've done the time audit, you can kind of go down the list and say, well, I'm going to look at all the things that don't serve my plan that really don't need to be done. And that's really simple. I'm going to eliminate those things. I'm not going to spend 6 hours a week on TV. I'm not going to spend 8 hours a week scrolling on social media. I'm not going to play that third golf game. I'm not going to take on too many meetings, and I'm going to slow down on some of my socializing. And as a result, I'm going to find 15 hours a week. And with those 15 hours a week, I'm going to replace that time with some other areas of life that aren't getting enough attention, because clearly these things aren't really moving the needle for me in any way, shape, or form. And I can live without these things and use that time on something that is more fulfilling, that serves my life's plan. Now, after I've eliminated everything I can from that time audit list, the next thing I move on to is automation. What on that list that I spent time doing could be automated? Now, I can automate my weekly groceries. I can automate my house cleaning, my vehicle maintenance schedules, my pool service, my laundry service, refueling all the trucks at your shop or at your yard, maybe estimating your projects, tracking time, job schedules. There's a million things you can automate. And I would really hazard that to say, like, you should really make sure your time audit includes everything, all parts of life. Don't just time audit your business part and your personal part. Really blend the list and then decide what's important in each bucket and decide what to eliminate, automate, and delegate based on your life vision. And your life vision should include all aspects of life, not just the business. And then on this delegate piece, it's thinking of, what are the $10 tasks versus the $10,000 tasks? If I'm the founder, owner of the business, there's very specific things I think I should spend my time doing. And I don't think it should be payroll or, booking meetings and scheduling resources. And I think somebody else couldn't do that stuff if they understand the system. And so it's up to me to make sure I have SOPs or standard operating procedures in my business so that people can do these things in my absence and we still get repeatable results. Now, this concept of an integrated life, it has to be purposeful. Ultimately, I'll advise everybody to check out the most recent personal development workshop that we did. I think it's up on YouTube right now. Maybe the team can throw it in the chat here. But really getting focused on what your purpose is, your life purpose for you as an individual, is definitely a place to start. We're going to want a personal vision, yes, for you and your family. And then you're probably going to want one specifically for the business. Now, why would we have two visions? It's obvious. As a leader, you have to share the vision of the business with everybody. And as a person, I think you need a personal vision for your life so that you know where you're headed and that your family is a part of that vision and they know where you're headed so they could support. And most importantly, that business vision is an element of your personal vision. And for me, I kind of look at these key pillars of that integrated life. Really, when I look at my life, I think if I optimize my mental health and if I optimize my physical health, my relationships, and I spend a lot of time on continuous learning, and I continue to succeed in my career and business. And when I say succeed, it's not always just more money. it's more impact. And when I look at this list and I say, hey, there's my 5 goals. Those 5 pillars are my goals. My first goal is to optimize my mental health. Second, optimize my physical health. Third, optimize my relationships. Fourth, I'm going to optimize my time learning. And I'm going to optimize my career and my business. And so there's my 5 overarching goals. Now, every quarter, I'm going to come up with a list of 3 to 5 things under each of these pillars or goals. And I'm going to decide I'm going to do these 3 to 5 things to make this area of my life a little bit better. And again, all I'm trying to do is move forward, see my life's vision getting closer. But most importantly, I get to celebrate the success in these 5 areas of my life just by knowing what I'm trying to do and then mapping my time into these 5 categories. And so when I build a calendar, I'll take these 5 pillars and I'll actually map my time to these 5 pillars. Generally, every hour of the day is mapped back to one of these 5 pillars. And this way I know that I'm spending enough time in all elements of life, because it wasn't that way for me. In the past, all of my time was spent on career and business. I would spend time on continuous learning, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time on relationships, no time on physical health, and certainly no time on mental health. And I found myself burned out. And so when I lived right to left, from career cascading down to mental health, I ruined myself. And by flipping the script and actually putting my time in the opposite order and really saying, hey, first I have to be mentally healthy. And then I have to be physically healthy. And then I have to have these amazing relationships and people all around me where I'm filled with love and connection. And then I have the motivation to keep learning so that I can optimize my career and business. By living in that order, starting with mental health and cascading down to the career, everything started to feel better. And that feeling of never being enough, it just slowly dissipated and went away. And I lived with it in the worst way for many, many years. Now, when you look at this list, just ask yourself which pillar is suffering the most and write that down. And don't be afraid of it. This is where the inner self has to speak, and you have to let your inner self speak. And then where are you actually spending enough time? And where are you spending too much? Generally speaking, the area that's feeling most flawed is just not getting enough time, not getting enough attention. And where you spend your time really, truly does dictate your future. And that's why I love the calendar so much, because I get to design my future when I design my calendar. Now, we'll switch to the next page and I'll show you what I mean by this. Now, first off, I want to give you a little map. I just want you to think of this. Now, LeanScaper and Lana will give you a really good push here. You can create a vision, a mission, and I have no idea why core values is missing here, but it looks like my letters got deleted. Vision, mission, and core values. When you open up LeanScaper AI, the first thing that you work through is that for your business. Well, you can use Lana to help work through that for your personal vision, mission, and core values as well. And I'll strongly suggest that once you've built those, that you work on that if you're married or if you're in a long-term relationship, that you also share that and create a family vision, mission, and core values. And once you've done that, you can build some personal goals, some family goals, and also have your business goals. Now, what gets really exciting is when you've got your vision, mission, and core values outlined, it allows you to build some really good goals to support what you're working toward as a vision. Now, when we've got these goals, what these goals allow us to do is start to build really meaningful calendars. Now, most people set goals that aren't really that good because they're not tied to that long-term vision. And so don't skip this stage. And again, that first personal development workshop that I did a few weeks back is on YouTube. We really kind of go deep into vision and mission in core values in that session. The next one that's coming up here in September is going to be heavy about creating goals. and then mapping your time back to those goals. So for me, as I said, I've got my 5 pillars. There's 3 to 5 things I'm generally working on in each of those 5 pillars. And now what I do with my time blocks is I actually spend my time very focused trying to improve in those areas specific to my goal plan. Now, what I'm generally doing if it's business, I'm creating SOPs and systems. And the reason I like to do it that way is when I see a problem, I fix it with an SOP, then I develop some other people who can run that playbook and evolve that playbook and make it even better over time. And then that allows me to spend more time building strategic relationships in the business, improving the brand, doing more vision thinking and less doing so that we keep getting better and better and better. Now, that's just an example in business. If it's my fitness, very similarly, I might realize I need to spend extra time to get fit. I had a ton of weight to lose a few years ago, so I put 5 hours a day on my time calendar. And by putting 5 hours a day into fitness, I lost 140 pounds in 1 year. It was actually miraculously easy. Why? Because my vision was clear. My goals were clear. I knew I had to lose 4 pounds a week. And I knew that if I had the caloric deficit from walking and if I did the strength workouts, that if I just stayed on target, it's just math. Weight loss is nothing more than a math equation, like most things in life. And again, where I spent my time meant whether or not I would see that result. And so, regardless of what the goal is, whether it's mending a broken relationship, creating a better, more deeper connection in your marriage, maybe it's losing weight, maybe it's, breaking a generational curse of living with anxiety, whatever it happens to be, you can break that cycle by changing where you spend your time. And so I really think that once I started to calendar and block time, then it became much easier for me to really start to think about things and say, let's put some metrics around these goals with some measurable targets. Let's build a scorecard for whatever it is I'm trying to achieve. And then let's just make sure that I take the time to do some recurring meetings, either with a coach to help me along with my improvement, with an employee if I'm trying to help them, maybe with a business partner if we're building some new product, or, maybe it's just time with myself to reflect on how to get better or how to learn more. But again, the recurring meetings become this delivery mechanism for continuous improvement. The time blocks are there to actually execute, but the recurring meetings are there to really reflect on what the strategy is, how I'm executing, and what the metrics are telling me. Now, as I kind of think about doing this, I think it's important that you build your own little calendar and just start with an ugly little sketch like this one. I think sometimes people want to overthink these things. From the sun up to sundown, what does your day look like? When are you going to get up? And now factoring in your personal goals, your family goals, and your business goals, how are you going to make time to optimize all of these? Now, I really think that when I really sit down and I think through this whole thing, I'm going to run out of time. Now, most people think that way, but when you've done the time audit and you've automated a ton of things and you've delegated a ton of things and you've eliminated everything that doesn't even serve your goals, what you'll start to realize is, geez, I actually have a lot more time in my day. And once you've built this calendar and you've designed the life of your dreams, then you just get up each day and live it. And you get to feel like you're enough. Because if you just do what's on your calendar, at the end of the day, when you reflect, you actually look back and say, I'm living the life of my dreams. I don't think many people get to say that. I get to say that every day, every night, and every morning. I have a gratitude session. And generally, I get to say daily, I am living the life of my dreams. I designed it, and I get to live it. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow. And I had a great day today. And my gratitude session is filled with gratitude for myself, first off, for taking the time to design this life, but then it's filled with gratitude for all the people who God has put around me to help. And then I'm really filled with gratitude for the impact that we're all cumulatively having on others around us as a result of where we spend our time. And so there's a lot of motivation and a lot of gratitude to have when you've designed a calendar like this. It really does change your life. And so when you're coming up with this time audit, as you kind of go through the time audit, if you start to see that it's getting too clogged up, then start to cut your time increments. This is really important. For me, I was extremely busy when I first started doing this, and I had to break my day into 15-minute increments in order to get through everything. Over time, I really started to carve that down to half hour, eventually more to like 1 hour increments for the most part. But if you're noticing that it's just not possible to fit it all into 10 hours or 12 hours, just break it down into further increments. This little example is a little bit simplified, as you can see, but don't be afraid to use 15-minute increments. If you don't have time to work out for an hour a day, start with working out 30 minutes a day. If you don't have time to take 1 hour lunches 5 days a week, start by taking 15 or 20-minute lunches or 30-minute lunches. But just get them in the calendar and then try sticking to the calendar. And you get to evolve this calendar every week. This is beautiful. Every Sunday I sit down, Sunday evening, I've got a time block. All I do is look at all of the recurring time blocks of meetings in my calendar for the following week. I decide what I can do and what I can't do. I've got to cancel a few meetings, move a few time blocks around, but generally what I'm trying to do is maintain the overall flow so that I keep spending enough time in each area of my business or my life and my business, so that what I've made commitments to myself to do actually become a reality. Because again, I think when we feel like we're never enough, it's because we haven't made clear commitments to ourselves and we're not clear on whether or not we're moving forward. And I don't care who it is, whether it's Tony Robbins or the Dalai Lama, just about every guru on earth is going to tell you the same thing. Incremental improvement is the key to happiness and fulfillment. When you can see incremental improvement in the areas of your life that don't feel like there's enough, then you start to feel better. And when you can actually practice gratitude each day for what you have and who you have and everything that you get to do each day, then life feels very fulfilling. But it has to be by design. So my advice to get there as quickly as possible is really quite simple with these 5 steps. Get the time audit and the calendar rebalanced. See that calendar as a living, breathing thing. Focus on that delegation list and build as many SOPs as possible. If you're a landscaper, Lana is built for you. You can build SOPs to solve just about any problem. Hand those off to your team, have a discussion, evolve them, improve them, tweak them, measure them, and then just keep focused on systems that enable other people to do your work, that lower value work in your absence, so that you can focus on the higher revenue items or the more fulfilling items. Not everything's about money, right? Just more time with family, more time with yourself, more time to work out, whatever it happens to be. Automation, use the calendar to automate everything. Automate where you spend your time, automate when the groceries come, when the laundry gets picked up, when the house cleaners are going to be there. That calendar is an automation tool. And these days we can build recurring meetings like in seconds using our calendar apps. And so your calendar becomes a huge component of automation. And then last, use all of this time to grow the people that are around you. Grow your direct reports, grow your employees, grow your family, grow yourself. Use the extra time. Deploy some standard operating procedures or some systems or some automations. Use scorecards to keep track and see how things are going, even for yourself, even personally. And then make sure that you've got some meetings in your calendar, whether they're with yourself or with others, to actually just check in and make sure that things are actually moving forward in accordance with these pillars or with the goals that you've set for your life. I'll take a couple questions and we'll wrap up there.
Ian is referencing, you mentioned a book on flow. Can you remind us the title?
My favorite author on the whole topic of flow is Stephen Kotler, and he's written a number of books on the subject. Probably my favorite all-time book is his book, Art of the Impossible. He rarely breaks it down. This is not an easy read. This isn't something you kind of read and walk away from. This is something that you study. It takes time, but I can tell you it really sheds an incredible amount of light on our biology, on psychology, and on what it really truly takes to do what most people perceive as being impossible. I think it's a recipe to do whatever you can imagine. If you learn what he describes in this book, I think you can basically do anything.
So this is the book, and it's The Art of the Impossible, Stephen Kotler. And there's another one that he does, which is called The Rise of Superman, which I would also add to the list. But I wanted to highlight this because this is not like your super woo-woo, just kind of like whatever mindset book. Like this is the his sources. I just showing you how incredibly robust the science is on this. Very, very, very rigorously researched. And this guy, Stephen Kotler, is the best in the world in all things flow state, which is why Mark says flow so much when he speaks from stage, I think. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's the book that he was mentioning in. Okay, Brittany's asking you, tell us about the wooden planner in the background when you can. Do you know what he's talking about? Wooden planner?
I have planer. Oh, wooden planer.
Oh, sorry. There's one and not two. I thought we were talking about time planning. He's asking me what.
I love antique tools. That's like a thing for me. I like having them. I like using them. So that's a little something about me, I guess.
Wooden planer, not planner. Mark, how long did it take you to go from time recording to your first block calendar?
Not long. I think what you're going to probably find is you get almost addicted to time management because you realize it's actually, I use that term time management, but I actually hate the term. It's actually just designing a life of intent. And so once you've kind of gone through that time audit exercise, I feel like it's so annoying to you personally to think like how much of your time you're wasting that you're almost in a hurry to start putting in block time into your calendar and recurring meetings because that realization that you're wasting 20%, 30% of your time on things that don't serve you, I think really motivates you to move quick. So I personally, I think it was just kind of finish the time audit and get right down to calendaring. And then your calendar just becomes this living, breathing mechanism of designing a life of intent. And it just never goes away once you get started.
I wanted to share something on the fly here, if you guys don't mind. I'm going to screen share really quickly. I was talking about this in the chat, but it's better with a visual. If you're already using a block schedule, one of the fastest like up levels that you can do to your block scheduling technique, and I think that's the right word for it, is technique. Like this is a practice, is this idea that I call lining out the work. And I was taught this by a guy named Isaac Barlow, who's going to be on the podcast in a couple weeks, who designed the first time tracking app for the trades. And his mantra is confused people waste a lot of time. But that extends to like entrepreneurs. Confused entrepreneurs waste a lot of time too. So one of the things that I do with every single time block is I know what good looks like for like when I'm working on my content factory, which is what I'm working on right now. This is how I know what a good 3-hour block spent on the content factory looks like. And so every time I sit down, I articulate to myself what needs to be done in this block to feel that continuous improvement. And it seems like a subtle shift, but just that little step of a list in the calendar block you won't believe how much less time wasting you do and how much more focused on the right things you are. Because you can put a 3 hour block in your schedule any day of the week and say, theoretically, I'm going to work on this. And you drift onto TikTok and you go have a snack and you work on some other stuff and you check an email. It's so subtle. Time is like so slippery. It's like sand through your fingers. So just a little subtle shift. If you're already using a block schedule, write outcomes in every single time block, and you're going to be blown away at how much better those time blocks become. So little.
It's I love that approach, Benji. Like knowing what you're going to do in the time block is big. A lot of times people start with time blocking, and they get to that time block, and there's not really enough intention on where the time's going to be spent, so they don't actually spend the time block on the thing that they've aligned it for, and you're kind of right back to square one. So that hack that you just mentioned, I'm not a big fan of that word, but it really does work when you just simply outline what you're going to do with that time block in advance. And again, on Sunday night, good idea to sit down and look at your recurring time blocks and say, well, this week I'm going to use that block to solve these three things.
A really, really great question from Nordine here. I know we're over, but I do want to hit this because I'm going to feed this to you if no one asked. Comes up every time. It's the biggest objection that entrepreneurs, especially landscapers, have to time blocking. This, in other words, this is the reason that they say they can't do it. She's asking, how do you deal with unforeseen last minute changes, urgent matters, and fires that erupt on the job site? What are we supposed to do when we have to go deal with something and can't follow what we've put on the calendar?
This is a good question, and I feel your pain. I'm just going to start by saying those fires exist because you haven't spent enough time creating repeatable systems for other people to follow. And when there are no repeatable systems, there's no quality assurance. And so what ends up happening is you're kind of one step forward and two steps back always in business. And so your staff can't react to common problems because there's no way for them to be enabled to do so. And so you kind of run into the fire every time. And the more you do it, the less they actually own it. And so what happens is you solve every problem in the business and you become a control freak that kind of runs in circles dealing with everybody else's problems. And the only way to really pull back from it is to start putting a few hours a day into creating repeatable systems and training and enabling your people to start to solve the most common problems. And so that's how you get started with the shift is you say, here's the fires that start the most. I'll create systems to eliminate those, which will reduce the amount of chaos and enable my people to solve more problems on their own. And then you just keep doing it over and over and over again. And eventually, after a year of sitting down and creating a system or two each week or each day, you can imagine there's not that many fires to put out. And so you really don't have to be so reactive. And keep in mind, when there are problems on job sites, we shouldn't be dropping everything and running over there. We should be really utilizing technology. We should be using FaceTime, and we should be having more discussions remotely to solve these issues. And so I think a good way to approach it is to really consider what an emergency is versus what a perceived emergency is, and then really start to create systems to solve problems instead of hopping in the truck or the car and getting over there to solve them every time.
And Nordine, it's not an overnight thing. Part of calendar worship is calendar hygiene, and calendar hygiene means sometimes you do have to reschedule things. And even the best of the best need to just, you know what, I got to kick this out a few days. I was meant to sit down, cover job costing from Q3, so we're set up for Q4. And we had an injury on site, and I did have to deal with that. So this block is going to go from Thursday when it was scheduled to next Tuesday, and that's something that you'll get in the cycle of. So don't think that you need to be 100% robotic and minute to minute perfectly. Like some of it, there's a little bit of flex to it, and you are going to have fires that do erupt, and you do need to reschedule things, and that's okay too. But this is directional correctness we're trying to achieve to a much more scheduled life. And and week. We are over. Thank you guys so much for this great web class and great questions. And we will see you all very soon. Have an awesome weekend.